Last week, Reverend Karen talked about the disruption of the idea of the sacred, how much new thought in science mind, new physics, new ways of understanding life disrupts an old idea about an anthropomorphized God and reward and punishment, and these ways in which we have tried to keep ourselves being good human beings while we were spiritually maturing. But now we are beginning to spiritually mature and understand that if we want to live a life that expresses spiritual values and spiritual truths, we have to find that for ourselves. And we have to disrupt the old ways of thinking and being, both personally and collectively. So today we're talking about beyond the disruption of the sacred is to actually invite ourselves to make disruption sacred. How can we take the things and the events and the circumstances and the situations in our life that are disruptive as we have been experiencing them and actually invite the sacred into the experience, that we may take it up differently and that we may experience it differently? And then ultimately, how do we actually invite sacred disruption? To decide that disruption is actually something that is valuable as opposed to something to be afraid of. So when we decide that disruption is actually something valuable, we are walking in the footsteps of the master teacher. There are many people who will say that Jesus was the great disruptor of spiritual traditions in the West, and Buddha was certainly the great disruptor of the spiritual traditions in the East. It's interesting that 25 years ago, there was actually a new business model or business understanding that came out of the Harvard Business School called disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation. And that the value of disruption really allows for incredible creativity and possibility to emerge. And then actually, there's something really powerful about being the disruptive force or the disruptor. Now, in Western philosophies, in science, and especially in our Western religions, well, actually, quite truthfully, a lot of religions, we don't really embrace disruption. We don't embrace it. It's bad, it's evil, and it is to be feared. And yet we find that in Western mythology, in many Eastern religions, in the indigenous and fertility spiritualities, in ecology, in liberation theology, in all of these ways, there is a reclaiming of the feminine that actually allows us to embrace disruption. And it's so fascinating that these two things inevitably go together. Where the feminine has been relegated to the side or denied altogether, disruption is made bad, evil, wrong, something to be feared and avoided. In those traditions and mythologies that embrace the feminine in a powerful way, understand disruption very differently. So today we're going to be inspired by some things from the Hindu tradition to begin with. And so in all spiritual traditions, there is generally a trinity. In the Hindu tradition is no different. We have the trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma is the creative deity, the creative force and power. Vishnu is the preserver, that which maintains and sustains life. The Hindus have a deep recognition and understanding of the importance of sustainability and resilience. And this is part of the Vishnu energy of the preserver. And then they actually really truthfully understand that there is a spiritual reality to Shiva, which is the destroyer, the change agent. That which is growing also dies. On the physical plane, there are the cycles and seasons of life. It's so interesting that in our Judeo-Christian culture, the destroyer is either a vengeful God, think Sodom and Gomorrah, think the Great Flood, things like that, or the devil, tempting us off the path and keeping us from our best possible selves. And yet nature teaches us otherwise. These cycles of life teach us about the regeneration that comes. I remember when I first started learning, I went to a University of Washington for environmental science. In my first ecology class, we went out to the rainforests on the Olympic Peninsula. Truly one of the most magical places on the face of the planet. And as we would hike through the rainforest, we would see these trees that would, I'm going to just put this down here so I don't have to keep carrying it. We see these trees that were lined up in a row as if they had been planted. And I remember the professor saying, look at that, isn't that amazing? Well, all of those trees, what happened is a giant tree fell, and as it decomposed, it became what's called a nurse log. A nurse log. As it was decomposing, it created the perfect place for seedlings to drop into, have exactly what they needed, and out of this giant tree that had given its life, that had died, 10 other trees were growing and replacing one tree with this beautiful nursery of saplings and growth and life. We see this after the spring flood or the autumn leaves, right? The spring flood, not the flooding that we get due to climate change, but the normal spring flooding brings lush nutrients to the soil. The autumn leaves create a huge, beautiful humus, which turns into some of the most beautiful earth into which the seeds fall and luxurious ecosystems grow again. Each of these places of death and destruction become the most fertile places for new life to grow, which is why in the Hindu tradition there's this profound respect and understanding of Shiva, of the destroyer. Now, it's interesting that in this pantheon of deities, which of course we know are simply representations of the different faces of the one, Shiva has a consort, Kali, and Kali is the mother of destruction and death. She is considered the place of chaos. She is the consort of Shiva and is the most powerful feminine image that we have in any world tradition. Actually, Shiva doesn't do the destroying at all. It is actually the power of Kali that brings about the destruction which allows for regeneration. I have a beautiful statue of Shiva at home, and most of the people that come to my home don't like it. She's scary. She's ferocious. She's all black metal, very hard, very strong, very powerful. Kali is fearsome. She is shown as black, standing over the white corpse of her consort Shiva, who is inert without her power. Without the feminine power, Shiva cannot do his work. Now, interestingly enough, she generally has 4 arms, representing the 4 directions of space. Now, I don't actually know what the 4 directions of space are. I know about the X, Y, and Z axis. I don't know if the 4th dimension in this particular understanding is time, or if there's another 4th dimension I don't know about. The square that becomes the cube. I'm not really sure. It's something really worth thinking about. However, not to get lost on the tangent, on these 4 arms, one hand holds a sword, the power of destruction. Another, a severed head, to show the living their destiny. What is our destiny as human beings? It is death. It is physical death. But she has a 3rd hand that is the attitude to remove fear, and the 4th that bestows bliss. How interesting. Vishnu says in the Upanishads about Kali, maternal cause of all change, manifestation, and destruction. The whole universe rests upon her, rises out of her, and melts into her. From her crystallize the original elements and qualities which construct the apparent world. She is both mother and grave. The gods themselves are merely constructs out of her maternal substance, which is both consciousness and potential joy. When have you ever heard of the divine feminine or the divine mother described that way? Marcus Borg, in his books on meeting Jesus again for the first time and reading the Bible again for the first time, he talks about how important in the very early Hebrew traditions of creation, there is this other aspect of God that is actually spoken about in the ancient Hebrew in the feminine, and it is in the Greek translated into Sophia, which means wisdom, which is the wisdom that brings the absolute creative force into physical manifestation. Without Sophia, there is no creation. There is no physical world. There is no expression without Sophia. But somewhere along the line, this whole idea gets lost. So I pulled out another description about Kali, which I really, really loved. Kali is the ferocious Hindu deity of illuminating darkness, a destroyer of illusions. Her ruthless compassion cuts through our obliviousness to how things really are. Isn't that what it is to look at our unconscious biases, to recognize the ways in which we are not paying attention to how our actions impact others or the earth, to cut through. The ruthless compassion cuts through our obliviousness to how things really are. On the spiritual path, Kali uses shakeups and transformations to destroy the subject-object consciousness and restore our intimacy with all things. To cut through the intellectualizing, the rationalizing, the categorizing, the thinking that we understand. To embrace a direct experience and intimacy with all things. Her path to liberation is swift and challenging. Kali Ma represents a fierce advocacy for justice for all. So I love that. I have the woman's name who wrote that. I have another bit I'm going to read to you, so I will tell you who she is. But it is so amazing that this incredible divine mother figure has been so relegated to the side and left out in so many ways. And so what's so fascinating about Kali is that she is simultaneously the divine mother, both the place of destroyer, destruction. The Christians call her the mother of disease. And yet she is also the bringer of life, fertile and the representation of fertility. She is the most powerful feminine image of the divine in all the world religions. She began in the Indus Valley in a fertility spirituality and was embraced by Hinduism in all of her fullness and all of her glory. She does live in that original Trinity from the Hindu tradition. Because Kali is so associated with death and destruction, we completely overlook this idea of the divine feminine, the divine mother aspect of her. Why? Because it's really hard to imagine and to think about the divine feminine as a destroyer, isn't it? We think of the father as either protector or punisher, and we like to think of the mother as nothing but nurturing and supportive. That's what it means to anthropomorphize our gods and make them into our own image, what we want and need. But when we look at the mother in all of her fullness, we recognize that the divine mother, the power of the feminine, is not just Eve, right? Eve gave us the idea that the feminine is the temptress. She's the one to blame. And we grow up with the idea of the feminine being either the Madonna or the whore, right? She's either the virgin or she's the sex kitten you take to bed. But the minute she becomes wife and mother, she's no longer interesting, desirable. She's certainly not sexy in any way, and therefore is less valued and less valuable. But the indigenous people and the people of the fertility traditions and the people who embrace Kali recognize that there is a power in the divine feminine. Think of the mother bear who ferociously protects her cubs. Think of all of the ways in which Marianne Williamson brought the idea of love into the political spectrum as she talked. The fierceness of love that will protect others who are unable to protect themselves, or who are in a systemic situation and unable to protect themselves, or our planet that is struggling to find ways to protect itself, although isn't doing so bad in protecting itself, is it? This power of the divine feminine is the very opposite of the martyred, sacrificial mother that I grew up with, right? I grew up with that when you cook and you put the food out, you always reserve the smallest piece to yourself. You give everybody else the good stuff, and if there's anything burnt, right, you take it. Because you're the cook and you're the mom, and that's just what you do. You suck it up. Right? Think of all the women who are leaving our workplaces in droves because of the issues with childcare, because they're tired of sucking it up. They're tired of working and coming home and taking care of the kids and having to figure all of that out all at the same time. And all of the sacrifices, and not just women. This is a cultural thing that we learn how to do. We learn how to sacrifice our own power, our own need and desire for our lives in service to something. We'll talk about what that something is in a minute. So when we reclaim the power of the divine feminine, even men and women, right? This isn't about being a woman creating and claiming the divine feminine. This is all of us claiming the divine feminine. We reclaim our disowned outrage, our childhood grief at having to sacrifice our health or safety or dignity to placate the adults around us. Oh man, I raised my hand on that one. I was the peacemaker in the family. My father would rage, my mother would try to figure out what to do. She would abdicate. I was the peacemaker. We're going to be nice. And I was taught to be nice. Good little girls, they're nice. And boys are supposed to be nice too. So while we're at it, let's reclaim our quirks, our special needs, our gifts, our inborn vocations that were and still are the beauty and our power. Your uniqueness lives in your bones, the same bones that hold your shape, that are like the bones of the forest, which are the beautiful trees that we see so beautifully etched against the sky in winter. And when I have known my own outrage and taken myself back, do you see that I can stand with and for yours? And your outrage no longer frightens me. And I am willing to embrace the disruption that your outrage brings, that we can be in that place of tolerating the disruption when others say, this is not okay. And they say it with rage when injustice happens. These are the things that allow us to disrupt business as usual. We don't disrupt a business as usual by simply reasonably, spiritually acquiescing to what is, but by claiming the power to create true change. We speak about it, True change is transformation. You can change things, but they can change back. The ultimate disruption that you see in the natural world, the ultimate disruption is the butterfly. The caterpillar has been utterly and completely disrupted. The entire body liquefies, the head pops off, and then the imaginal cells take over. And that which emerges from the cocoon is totally unrelated to that which built the cocoon in the first place. That is about as disrupted as you can get. And do we not prize that transformation, the beauty of the butterfly as it soars off into its own life? Without disruption, that butterfly cannot experience its own transformation. So I'm going to read a last little piece from this, from Vanessa Tarakali. The pieces I've been reading to you are from her. These invitations deserve to be met with a robust presence that is willing to be changed. This is the invitation to sacred disruption. To access this robustness, I need to know I will fight for me. I need to know I have my own back and that I will insist that my needs are acknowledged. Knowing that I will fight for myself has given me more internal room, more relaxed, spacious room to welcome disruption of my business as usual, my status quo. And you need to know that you will fight for you. But it's not just about fighting, it's also about grieving. We must have room to grieve having been sacrificed and abandoned. Grief brings business as usual to a standstill, as it should. As it must if this planet is to survive. Reclaiming our willingness to fight and grieve for ourselves enables more resilient responses to sacred disruptions, whether by activists, spiritual people, or by children. If our planet is to survive, people with disabilities, forgotten people, disposable peoples, island people, walruses and bees are screaming, wailing, pounding at the smug, violent, oblivious culture to stop. Stop killing us all. And of course, we have to stop killing ourselves. I told Karen when I was getting ready to work on this talk that I hate it when I have to talk about things that I have to remember myself. The rest of this talk here, this is all for me. You can listen in. Feel free to listen in. But I need to be reminded of these things. So, how do we make disruption sacred? How do we embrace the power of Kali in our own lives? Embrace sacred disruption, make it sacred, or actually invite it in the first place? Well, there are 3 words that I'm going to present to you that I have spent 20 years making friends with. Still working on it. Ambiguity, uncertainty, and the unknown. Now, as spiritual people, we like to seek certainty and security. We want proof that God is there and that if we will do a certain thing, then we're good and right and all is well with the world and therefore favored by God. Yeah. Well, it's great. That works for children. Works for the grandchildren. They need a certain amount of safety and security provided by somebody else, but then we grow up. And we begin to spiritually mature. The truth is, moving without certainty and security in the human world, because there is an understanding and trust of the nature of reality, is true spirituality. Not to try to manage the conditions of the world so that there is outer safety and security and certainty, but to recognize that it lives as the truth of our very being. Because the physical human world is always changing. There's nothing that's secure, permanent, or guaranteed in the human realm, in the realm of the physical world. It is a great uncertainty. That's how we have to learn how to walk through life. That's why we live a spiritual faith. I remember years ago, the first time I had this conversation in a coaching session with a woman, and I was just really beginning to get a clue that I had gone on a spiritual path because I wanted the guarantee that I was right, that I was okay, and that everything was going to turn out okay. You know, I mean, I love Hallmark movies, and I want to know that there's going to be a happy ending. And if it doesn't have a happy ending, I don't want to watch the movie. But the happy ending isn't in the world itself. It is in the way in which we engage with the world, the place from which we engage. And the thing I remember talking about in this coaching session is, how do I know? How do I know it's going to work out okay? How do I know I'm doing the right thing? How do I know? How do I know? And my answer to her, you don't. You don't know. You don't know. But we're going to talk about that is the place right there where we truly step into our spiritual faith, our deep and profound trust. So how do we do that? Ambiguity. Ambiguity means there's no right answer. Ambiguity means, by definition, that the meaning that has many meanings. And so what we can do, what we are allowed to do, what we are enjoined to do, is to choose the meaning that we choose, not to look for the right answer. I can't tell you how many people come to me for coaching and they say, should I stay in this relationship or should I go? Well, unless you're being actively abused in some form or fashion, my answer is always the same. If you stay, you will learn and grow. If you go, you will learn and grow. Which do you choose? There's no right answer. Our intuition, dreams, and signs, people will say, how do I know? Is it me or is it my ego? How do I know? We don't know. The ambiguity is that we choose the meaning. We decide what it means. Moving with uncertainty is a profound act of faith. There is no guarantee, but there is the recognition that if we will allow the universe to unfold, and that we recognize that life is emerging and evolving through us, and we stay focused on the end result, the likelihood of us moving in that direction is way more, way better, and the universe rallies around to support us. What we want is certainty in the how. We don't get to have that. What we get to have is certainty in the what. That life is for us. That the universe does actually support the things that we desire and that we seek to be a part of and that we seek to create. But the how is where that uncertainty comes in. I love the Buddhist saying that when you decide to go on a path, when you step out, the path rises to meet your foot. What we want to do is see the path laid out. Oh, that's the path. Oh, I'm just going to walk it. No, we don't know what the path is. What we know is that when we step out, the path rises to meet our foot. That's what we know. And so this place of the unknown is what they call beginner's mind. The beginner's mind, to not know. I can remember when I was working at CSL in an international organization. I was the chair of the new core council. We'd gone through a big, giant reorganization, and I was at the convention that year, and people were saying, well, what about this? Well, I don't know. Well, what are we going to do about that? No, I don't know. Well, how are we going to handle this? Well, I don't know. We're going to make it up. We're smart. We have the divine intelligence and wisdom of the universe. We'll figure it out. And I actually had other people in leadership that say, will you stop saying you don't know? Why? Why should I stop saying I don't know? Beginner's mind invites us into new ideas, new opportunities, and a deep and profound trust that the inspiration will come, the possibilities will show themselves, we will experiment with things, some of them will work, some of them won't, but we will learn and grow rather than needing things to be a certain way. So to make our disruption sacred, we have to take it to the altar of our spirituality. We have to take it to the altar of our spirituality and assume that there is something here for us. We invite revelation. What is here for us? What new intuition, new understanding, new idea? To expect learning, to learn to be a certain way, speak a certain way, do a new thing, and then to practice. Disruption invites us into the deepest practice. That's certainly been true for me in the last couple of years. How do you get through the pandemic? How do you get through all of this? How is it that CSLDallas is stable and thriving? Because we have practiced and practiced and practiced, living in faith, living in trust, letting it be okay that we don't know, being in the chaos of it, and allowing creativity to come forward, letting things die around us and be destroyed, and finding the new. To invite sacred disruption into our lives is to confront our own complacency, our comfort, our need for convenience, the willingness, the ways in which we accommodate others, and the belief about how life is supposed to be, the status quo, and our own willingness to be inauthentic, to live inside a box, to live inside an acceptable way of being. To invite disruption that is sacred, to really invite sacred disruption, is to recognize that these things are the things that stand in the way of the new fertile life that is seeking to grow, not only in our own lives, but in humanity as a whole and on our planet. To allow ourselves to see how much we hold on to these things. You could write this list down and every day ask yourself, do I not want to do that because I'm more comfortable not doing it? Does it feel inconvenient? I can remember being in a relationship. We never went anywhere. We never did anything because it was just, so inconvenient to pack for camping. And it was so inconvenient to decide to, where we were going to go or what we were going to do. Everything was inconvenient and it was too challenging. Inviting sacred disruption invites us into our spiritual awakening. It invites us to create new personal habits. It forces us to look at our unconscious biases, the ways in which we are damaging our environment, the ways in which we are colluding with the status quo of power and wealth, and the ways in which we are not paying attention to equity and inclusion. These are the things that need to be disrupted. And I love that we're talking about this on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. What a powerful expression of disruption. No, we won't not sit in the front of the bus anymore. No, we won't not sit on the lunch counter anymore. No, we will march together because this is not okay. That's what sacred disruption means. Not fight for the sake of fight, not argument for the sake of my opinion, not an unwillingness to be moved, but a profound recognition that there is a larger reality that we're a part of, and that our job is to bring that larger reality into being through us. Kali is the most powerful divine mother in any faith tradition around the world and across the ages. Her 4 arms, the first one with the sword, destroys only ignorance, false ideas, and egoic desires, not unlike the sword of compassion that Kuan Yin wields that no one ever wants to talk about. The only thing permanent is change. So when we embrace change and growth, we are allowing death of ourselves, of the status quo, of the things that keep us comfortable, of the ways we've always done things, all of those things. We are allowing things to die. Kali bestows the strength to bear life, to not be afraid. Birthing is hard and messy work, and she promises that each one of us is strong enough and equal to bear the life that we are seeking and that we choose to birth. And she wants only the best, the hand of bliss, that the universe supports you and always has your back. That power and passion are the things that create change that is truly fulfilling. Whether we are raising a child, building a sustainable business, making a difference in social justice, creating lives that work, and a world that works. Reimagine everything starts with a willingness to disrupt those things that are standing in the way. I really, really invite you to this work. This is the work that we're up to, and this is the work that we've always been up to, but this year we're making it very explicit. Let's disrupt the things that stand in our way, that stand in the way of humanity, that we can awaken to our spiritual magnificence, individually and collectively. The world needs us. We need us. We need each other, and we need ourselves. And so it is.